paradox of tolerance. This is something that I've been thinking about recently, and given the current political climate and how it's evident in social media that intolerance of intolerance is rife, I feel I should talk about it. I like to think of myself as a tolerant person, and that goes to the limit of when people that I care about are directly, or their happiness is directly endangered. So, say if anyone were to preach hate speech, I'd be all for the freedom of speech. Yes, this may mean that hate itself will eventually spread and probably will eventually lead to the endangering of my loved ones. I can't see the future, so I don't know if for sure that will happen, and I will only act upon the things that I can see clearly. The paradox of tolerance is that if you are tolerant of everything, then eventually intolerance will destroy your tolerance, due to the fact that if you are tolerant of, say, someone kicking you in the face, eventually you'll die. Or, say, if you're tolerant of a terrible government, then it's entirely possible that that terrible government will brainwash everyone to think like them, and their thinking may be intolerant. So, your method, your way of thought, your tolerance will be wiped out, will be stolen. Karl Popper, philosopher, wrote about this 73 years ago and ended in the conclusion that in order for tolerant society to be stable, it has to be intolerant of intolerance, though seemingly aside from the singular act of intolerance of intolerance. Anyway, this is undoubtedly the approach currently being taken by many peoples across the globe. My prime example, personally, being my housemate, who will remain unnamed. They are a bisexual mixed-race individual and are evidently one to defend their beliefs. However, their method of defending their beliefs is more of just not tolerating other people's beliefs, rather than listen to what people have to say and then say, actually, have you thought about this? It's to say, if you think this, you should die. Or, if you are of the belief of this, then you don't deserve to have anything on this list of things that are nice. So, that's how they think about it, and it confuses and astounds me simply because I thought the LGBTQ plus and feminist societies and movements were all about equality, and intolerance, especially at that level, is definitely not about equality. Regardless though, Popper's explanation of when the tolerant should be prepared to be intolerant is actually very apt. Popper would have said that we must be prepared to defend ourselves from the intolerant with reasoning and logic, which is in itself tolerant due to the definition of tolerance. It's not having an adverse reaction, but rather questioning people to think about what it is they're believing and doing, which invites learning. And learning, I'm sure most of us can agree, is a good thing, right? But there comes a time when logical reasoning and arguments are not enough. That time is when the intolerant people are intolerant enough to not listen, or to listen, but rather than have to go through the trouble of thinking of a response, instead they just punch you in the face. It's not good. Or, even worse, they don't listen. They come to you, they're spouting their beliefs. You mention anything they don't agree with, they put a proverbial cap in your proverbial ass. It can end up terribly. Seriously, ask World War II. It ended pretty bad. But if say if we had been tolerant, we being the non-Nazi side of that war, had been tolerant of their activities, they would have won the war. There wouldn't have been a war. They would have just swept across the globe, and I would probably be speaking some form of New German, because it likely would have evolved by that point under a singular world government. But regardless, I think most of us can agree, again, that would have been a bad thing. And if you don't agree with that, I'd like to hear why. But the bloodshed that happened there was to prevent future bloodshed. There may have been hundreds, thousands, millions of people who died. I don't know, I'm not a historian, I haven't looked at the figures or anything like that. But the tolerant rose up in intolerance of the Nazis, which is the easiest go-to example, really. And they went to war. They were intolerant enough to push it back so that their notion of tolerance was not wiped out. That is when Popper says we are allowed to be intolerant. When the external intolerance is going to eradicate you. You can be intolerant as a retaliatory matter to defend yourself, but only if reasoning and logic doesn't work. And it will still end in the ending of tolerance. Perhaps it's not a dichotomy of you're intolerant or you're tolerant. Perhaps, in fact, it is a sliding scale of levels of intolerance going into tolerance and so on. I don't know. Personally, I'd like to think it was that, and that it's best to be close to the 100% tolerant line. Being there makes you a pushover, and it's probably not great. So, what I would like to hear is your opinions on this in the comments, because I have no idea about how most people think about this. And tolerance is a big thing these days. It may not be directly in the news, but it is hidden in the news. Every time someone talks about someone being racist or fascist or sexist, they're effectively just calling them intolerant of race or freedom or certain genders. So, yes. Please, I need this to be a discussion. I have no idea as to what else it could be. And so I want to hear what people think. If anyone sees themselves as intolerant and proud, I'm very looking forward to hearing about that. Because that's a very unique perspective. I've never met anyone like that. Most people, even if they are intolerant, like to think of themselves as tolerant. Just like movie villains who are evil like to think of themselves as the good guys. So, yeah. Regardless though, I will catch you cats on the flip-flop should you return to the channel. Which you should do by pressing the subscribe and ringing the bell thing. Goodbye.